Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 15th of May, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Straight into the Middle East, Mike, I think it has to be.
It has to be, yes. This is captioned Palestinians play into Israeli hands. In a sense, they did yesterday. Now, just to bring everybody up to date, the death toll has risen since the morning to 60 from 58 overnight, killed in the clashes between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I say clashes because, of course, the Palestinians had stones and maybe some petrol bombs. The Israelis were using live rounds. Now, I have to say that after the interview, Brian, last week with Robert Inlakesh, I think that was Tuesday or Wednesday last week, I did receive one communication from somebody suggesting that we were putting out pro-Palestinian propaganda. But yet again, we see an example of the Israelis being completely heavy-handed, overly so. I've said that the Palestinians have played into Israeli hands here because, of course, what else was going to happen? The Israelis were only ever going to behave in this way. Now, of course, the people were being brought out onto the streets through the persuasion of Hamas, and perhaps they could have been a bit more sensible about how they protest, the nature of the protest. Nonetheless, the outcome has been pretty horrendous. Today they're burying their dead, and of course today is the 70th anniversary of what the Palestinians call Nakba, which is the displacement of Palestinians after the creation of the so-called State of Israel. Well, of course, what was going on yesterday that sparked this all off was Donald Trump's visit and the opening of the new embassy in Jerusalem, which was only ever going to be insightful. Israel using deadly force. The question that many people are asking is what else would they have done? This is the way that Israel has behaved for quite some time, and it was pretty much to be expected.
The way they always behave, Mike, and it's very hard to see what is going to change if they continue to play the game in this way. But at the same time, they're also saying that they're totally isolated and they're the only nation dealing with, quote, Iran in Syria. So where is Israel going at the moment, and what is actually in the minds of the Israeli government? It's very hard to tell.
Many people that are criticising what happened, making the possibly quite reasonable point that Donald Trump, by doing what he's done with the embassy, has given Israel carte blanche to do what they like. And just to reinforce that, then yesterday in the Security Council, there was an amendment went into the Security Council yesterday or a statement went into the Security Council yesterday to criticise what Israel was doing with the Palestinians yesterday, and that was vetoed by the United States. So, Palestinians have no opportunity here for any kind of legitimate protest, even if this one hadn't turned violent, and no support from the international community nor the mainstream media, because really there hasn't been much criticism in the mainstream media of what happened.
Well, there's not going to be any political support for Palestine coming from the present government, because we follow on with conservatives who have consistently said, paraphrasing, their loyalty to Israel is unshakable. Cameron said it, Theresa May is in the same mould.
Yes.
And we have constantly talked about the power of conservative Friends of Israel, which boast that they are able to lobby and influence at least 89, I think the figure is now 89 MPs. So we have a foreign nation effectively pulling the strings of Britain's political power. And more people need to talk about this. I'm going to add to that, Mike. I find it interesting that people are still trying to say we don't talk about it, but I think we've talked about it a lot.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to censorship. And this is the head of MI5, Andrew Parker, who was speaking in Berlin yesterday, accusing Russia of barefaced lying. That's his words, barefaced lying. He said that a great deal more needs to be done to counter Russia's activities. He said age-old attempts at covert influence and propaganda have been supercharged in online disinformation, which can be churned out at a massive scale and little cost. The aim is to sow doubt by flat denials of the truth, to dilute truth with falsehood, divert attention to fake stories, and do all they can to divide alliances. This is quite a statement by Mr. Parker, because he's saying here that disinformation can be churned out at a massive scale with little cost. Well, if that's the truth, then surely information can be churned out at a massive scale with little cost. So why does the mainstream media cost so much?
Because it's
cost more to lie, is that?
Well, yeah, a number of things went through my head, but actually part of that was the NHS conference, which we'll come on to. We're talking about the effects of privatisation, massive fraud and corruption, and the drive for profits.
Absolutely. Let's see what else he had to say. The Russian state's now well-practiced doctrine of blending media manipulation, social media disinformation and distortion with new and old forms of espionage. High levels of cyber attacks, military force and criminal thuggery is what is meant these days by the label hybrid threats. Russia's state media and representatives spread at least 30 different so-called explanations of the Salisbury poisonings in their efforts to mislead the world and their own people. And he said one media, well, he was pointing out that a media survey had found that 2/3 of social media output at the peak of the Salisbury story came from Russian government-controlled accounts. The intelligence service is clearly smarting about the fact that they've been caught with the Skripal affair with their pants down.
Yeah.
Well, the question is, was that their fault or was that the fault of their so-called political masters?
It's got to be both, Mike, because it can't be one side. It can't be a corrupt, devious government simply driving MI5 as an agency. They've got to be in bed together.
Absolutely.
Completely in bed.
But he said, we're committed to working with social media companies as they look to fulfill their ethical responsibility to prevent terrorists, hostile state and criminal exploitation of internet carried services, shining a light on terrorists and paedophiles, taking down bomb-making instructions. Sorry, I nearly laughed when I heard that as well.
Would you tell me that again? I might have just
yes.
missed that bit.
No, you didn't. You heard me right. He said shining a light on terrorists and paedophiles.
Right.
MI5 apparently shines a light on the activities of paedophiles in this country.
Except when they're involved with Westminster, the establishment, or presumably members of people within the security services.
Absolutely. But the point is that MI5 wanting to get right in there with the social media companies to make sure that they fulfill their their ethical responsibility to close down any free speech. Yeah, that's about the height of it.
Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, just to put a bit of background on this, the Kerslake report came out in March this year. This was the independent review, so-called independent review into the preparedness for an emergency response to the Manchester Arena attack on the 22nd of May 2017. And in that report was some criticism of the mainstream media and particularly regulation of the mainstream media. So as a result, IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, has released a response to that report. It's taken them a few weeks to pull that together. And they say IPSO has today announced a full response to the recommendations made by Lord Kerslake in his report on the aftermath of the Manchester Arena attack. One of the issues raised in the report was the experience of victims' families with the media. While some outlets, such as the Manchester Evening News, were singled out for praise, the report included troubling accounts from families and survivors who spoke about negative experiences with the media. IPSO's first priority has been to establish whether any regulatory action that can be taken to address, whether there is any regulatory action can be taken to address these accounts. Many broadcasters, freelancers, agency reporters, international journalists and journalists from mainstream print and digital outlets came to Manchester after the attack. The fact that no publications involved have been identified makes it challenging to provide a rigorous investigative response. Nonetheless, some of the incidents described would constitute grave breaches of the editor's code. IPSO urges everyone with information to share this. And so they have committed to some actions. They're going to thoroughly investigate any complaint about conduct by journalists working for or commissioned by an IPSO publisher. They're going to work with the Society of Editors and others in their convening across media roundtable to discuss issues raised in the review. They're going to develop an organisational major incident plan that is automatically triggered after any event leading to mass casualties. They're going to produce guidelines for editors and for the public based on the current editor's code, covering reporting on major incidents and provide newsroom training and resources. They're going to work with National Council for the Training of Journalists and to address the points raised in the report in future journalism training. They're going to work with the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing to support training provided to family liaison officers regarding the media. They're going to work with ACPO to raise the awareness of, which I guess is the National Police Chiefs Council, to raise the awareness of IPSO private advisory notices and explore whether there's a way of automatically reminding family liaison officers involved in a major incident about how IPSO can help with potential press intrusion. And they're going to step up work in liaising with emergency and medical services, professional organisations and other first responders to raise awareness of IPSO's services. Now, that's quite a lot of things that they're going to do as the non-Royal Charter regulator. But they're going to do these things. And what fascinates me, Brian, is that we seem to have this two-pronged attack going on, in official channels at least, going on against the mainstream media at the moment. On one hand, we have this type of attack through the MPs, the Labour MPs that were trying to push the amendments through on the amendments through Parliament last week, and we have this from the Kerslake report resulting in this response from IPSO. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we have Matt Hancock, who's the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, giving speeches about how the government needs to protect the mainstream media, support the mainstream media, because at the moment the mainstream media is facing such major challenges from disinformation and from commercial challenges. And if we remember, Matt Hancock during that speech in March said this: "I tremble at the thought of a media regulated by the state in a time of malevolent forces in politics. Get this wrong, and I fear for the future of a liberal democracy." But really, we were talking about this before the programme, Brian, and it is increasingly looking like what they're aiming for is an utterly controlled mainstream press. So at the moment they've got an utterly compliant mainstream press, but it's not quite controlled. And we seem to have this two-pronged attack of the threat of Leveson 2 on one hand, which is the stick, and the carrot of government offering support on the other hand. And actually, if we look at this statement again and look at it in a little bit more detail, "I tremble at the thought of a media regulated by the state at the time of malevolent forces in politics." Is that trembling through trepidation, or is that trembling through excitement? Right? And the other thing is, "Get this wrong, and I fear for the future of our liberal democracy." Whose liberal democracy? Yeah. He's talking about his liberal democracy, which is at threat at the moment from the fact that so many people are telling the truth. Yeah. So that statement from Matt Hancock doesn't mean what it appears to mean on the surface, or what most people might take it to mean.
Not at all, but I think it's right. Where are they heading, Mike? This is a total joined up attack on the press and free speech. In the chat box, somebody just said, so what we've really got is MI5, the government, the third sector, the media itself, social engineering charities, all working together to help suppress the press and media. And isn't it fascinating that we had Leveson with a common purpose agenda to close down the meeting? Never ever forget that the background to the first attack on the media and free speech came from Common Purpose, then working through the Media Standards Trust, and forgotten the other initiative, hacked off. Yeah. Driving for control, and now we've got Sir Bob Kerslake, another common purpose guru, who is just continuing the process. They didn't get it right the first time, so they're coming in for another go. Pretty obvious what's going on, I think.
So let's remind everybody about Media on Trial. Not very many tickets left for this. Get your ticket if you possibly can and get along to that in Leeds 2018. The venue has still not been announced, and I believe the organisers aren't going to announce the venue until very close to the time. So all ticket holders will be given the details in due course, but there are a few tickets left if anybody wants to get one.
And we say for our overseas viewers and listeners, what better reflection of the state of the United Kingdom under Theresa May's Conservative leadership than in order to hold a free speech event talking about free speech in the media and what's going wrong, it has to be done secretly, or at least details of the venue released at the last moment. So how anybody can say that we are still in a democracy in UK at the moment is beyond me.
Well, in the meantime, Sputnik here, headline is Moscow vows reciprocal response to Kiev's moves on RIA Novosti in Ukraine. Well, of course, we still have the ongoing Ofcom investigation into RT in this country, but in the Ukraine, RIA Novosti has found itself having staff being arrested and their offices invaded by the police and so on. They say that Ukrainian security services broke into the office of RIA Novosti, Ukraine news agency in Kiev on Tuesday, and a journalist who was inside the building dropped out of contact. I'm not sure that they've made contact with him yet. Kremlin spokesman said on Tuesday that Russia will take reciprocal measures against Ukrainian security services actions, but more details are needed. So apparently people wearing the uniform of the security services came into the office and people entering the building where the office was located. After that, the journalist who was in the office stopped communicating, and earlier in the day, another journalist had been detained from his home. So situation, well, similar situation to what goes on in this country, or at least in the sense of the attacks on Russian media, which are pretty much unjustifiable.
Indeed. Well, let's bring in this one, which is that Soros has said that he's going to move out of Hungary due to an increasingly repressive political and legal environment in that country, but his university at the moment plans to stay. Very interesting article. Russia Today covering it properly, of course. We're not going to see detail on this in Western and UK media. But I think that actually that this has got a very positive side to it, Mike, because it actually shows what a nation state is capable of when people decide that they're going to take action and they're going to expose what is really going on. So in Hungary, of course, people have now worked out that if we've got a Soros Foundation, it's not there for the good of democracy. This is there to help destabilise and break down the nation state. And just leaving Soros slightly to one side at the moment, let's move across to UK Column's National Health Conference, which took place on Saturday. And I'm going to say a very big thank you to our speakers. Several people, in fact, said to me that these were some of the most powerful speakers that they'd heard. So we had a number of doctors, but other health professionals speaking about what is really going on in the NHS. And the detail was just extraordinary. Huge amount of information put forward, all properly sourced and presented. And what I found interesting, Mike, was the common language that people were using. They're talking about the NHS, they're talking about increasing chaos, they're talking about health care declining and people suffering as a result. They're talking about criminality, fraud, corruption, bullying management, and of course the abuse of whistleblowers. And that language didn't come from one of the speakers, it came from all of them. And yet none of those speakers had been in communication with any of the other speakers before the event. So each presentation totally unique. I'll just bring this one on screen because introducing things, I kicked off with this as an early slide. I found it quite emotive really, because there's the old style nurse in a very smart uniform receiving some sort of award. But the caption of this, I think it was a Telegraph headline, was "Today is the day the NHS is murdered." And we use this to say at the conference, today is the day that the NHS is saved from murder. And certainly from the comments from our audience afterwards, people were really appreciative, not only for the amount of information and the explanation as to what was happening in the NHS, but the fact that this gave them a platform to actually go away and do something about it. So remember that it was the UK column alone that warned about the danger of common purpose, which had embedded itself in the NHS, a major part of the transformation programme. And this very good article by Martin Edwards the NHS Common Purpose Towards a Million Change Agents. That was not his title, that was the actual title of Common Purpose Change Agents embedded in the NHS. We're not interested in treating people, we just need to transform the NHS, and quote, we need 1 million change agents to do that. So let's have a look at some of the other work of the speakers. This was our opening speaker, Dr. Lucy Reynolds, and she gave an overview of what she called the hidden history of the NHS heist. This lady has worked at a very high level in the NHS. She's very knowledgeable about contractual issues, and of course those contracts have given more and more insight into how the NHS is being privatised by stealth. We were delighted to have a lady opening, and my goodness, that was a powerful start, Mike, wasn't it? And for those of you who might have seen her talk, which replaced the UK Column News yesterday, I just chose this one slide, but this was the kind of detail that was brought up really by all the speakers. And this one, in simple terms, showing in green on the left of the screen that as money comes into a standard NHS type care system, largely in third world countries, but as that system gets funding, as it's helped, so healthcare improves, it climbs towards the top of the screen. And then on the right hand side with the line in red, we see that as increasing privatisation measures come into the so-called Western developed healthcare systems, you start to see a decline in the provision of healthcare. And of course, what's happening is that the organisations are swallowing up more and more money, but that's being lost simply through greed for profits. So a very simple message on one hand, but a lot of detail and statistics on the other. This gentleman, Yusuf El-Ginghi, has written a book entitled How to Dismantle the NHS in 10 Easy Steps. And so he was able to look at key work that he'd already done, and he's already publicly published the fact that the NHS is being dismantled. Very good book. It's only a small book. I think it's about 64 pages long. You can find that if you have a look on the internet, and it provides a very good overview of the basics of what's happening. And of course, our other speakers added a lot more detail. So we had a look at medicine and treatment and what that entails. Patrick Quanton, former GP, he's now left mainstream medicine because he said it cannot possibly really help people because of its drive towards simply prescribing drugs and pushing vaccinations. And so he took apart the weaknesses of what is now the big pharma Western health care. And I have to bring this one in because I thought it was a brilliant cartoon. But Dr. Mark Jones, this is a PhD doctor, but he's worked within the NHS system. Great Ormond Street Hospital has been warning and warning for a very long time about what's happening. Produced this very wonderful cartoon showing that essentially us, the little man in the red shirt on the left, is being sacrificed as all the rest of the structure around the NHS is being changed in order to support what he calls NHS privatisation and the money man. That was a humorous look at what was going on, but Mark had also done a lot more detail to show the pathways, the template for how we're seeing this massive abuse of the NHS and the care system. And this was part of his diagram detailing the path from money on one hand through insurance, elderly people in particular being brought into nursing homes, and then ultimately they are killed off so that the state can take their assets. So these particular talks will be made available in the coming weeks. There's still quite a bit of work to be done on them, but I encourage you to have a look at them when they become available because of the amount of detail. And this one is a very sad image, but I think we need to put it on screen. This was part of the end of Dr. Mark Jones' talk, where he's actually saying, well, of course, we can talk about privatisation, we can talk about the change in the NHS management system, we can talk about fraud and corruption. What we're actually dealing with is the brutalising of very vulnerable elderly people. And of course, the embedded image there shows a shocking picture of the bruises on a very elderly lady as a result of mistreatment within the so-called care system. Now, having said that, we said at the outset of the conference, we recognise the many very good people trying to do their best within the NHS. And I'll also say we're delighted that we did have some members of the NHS in our audience, excuse me, and they were fully aware that something was very wrong, but they had the courage to attend the conference itself. And I'll add this one here, which is Dr. Graham Downing. Now, many of the UK column viewers and listeners will know the sort of work that Graham Downing speaks about, everything from AI to the way our brains are being attacked to vaccinations. But he didn't mince words because he was quick to show that it was privatisation, which was the complete elephant in the room that was starting to drive the problem. So we had some very serious subjects, some very emotive subjects, but we were able to get at least some humour in to help take the edge off it a little bit. Now, here we are on Tuesday, just a couple of days later, and I was absolutely fascinated that somebody sent this article from a local paper to the UK column, the South Hams Gazette, and it said that a 400-strong meeting had taken place where people were outraged that 2 local hospitals in Dartmouth and Kingswear were going to be closed. And there was a lot of passion in this meeting, with people saying, why is this happening? It's going to lead to worse NHS care. And of course, that is the reality. So common sense applied. But let's think of that meeting with 400 people, and let's remind ourselves of what local MP Gary Streeter said. This is just outrageous. He said, I hear from lots of constituents who have all kinds of ideas that I consider to be untrue, ranging from a secret Tory plan to privatise the NHS to conspiracy theories about the 2001 Twin Towers atrocities. So against the weekend, Mike, where we had professionals, doctors coming together, putting document after document on screen, evidence after evidence on screen to show the privatisation of the NHS. And yet we're in the situation where a local MP claims that if you warn about this, you're what, a conspiracy theorist?
That's a pretty disingenuous approach to take, to suggest on one hand anybody suggesting there's privatisation of the NHS is also talking about 9/11. It's a pretty dangerous position for him to be in.
Well, I see unbelievable arrogance. There's certainly ignorance in there, but if it isn't ignorance or incompetence, is this Gary Streeter also working with the Tory party to deceive people?
Absolutely.
I don't know. Yeah. We'll just end that segment by saying thank you to everybody that helped us set up that conference. And I'd also like to give a special thanks to the people who donated to UK Column at AV9, Ian Crane's AV9 event, because those donations really helped us to get that conference off the ground. So money well spent. Thank you very much for your help.
Okay, we've been talking about separation of powers and corporatisation recently, and well, let's get another example of it, because this is a press release from Europol, because BT, British telecoms company, has joined forces with Europol to build a safer cyberspace. Apparently, they've signed a memorandum of understanding with Europol to share knowledge about major cyber threats and attacks, and it was signed at Europol's headquarters in The Hague. And it provides a framework for BT and Europol to exchange threat intelligence data as well as information relating to cybersecurity trends, technical expertise and industry best practice. Apparently BT is committed to sharing threat intelligence data with industry partners and law enforcement agencies such as Europol in a secure and trusted way as a means of better protecting the UK and global customers from rapidly expanding cybercrime industry. Earlier this year, it became the first telecommunications provider in the world, they say, to start sharing information about malicious software and websites on a large scale with other ISPs via a free general portal. But the point here is, Brian, we're just seeing this increasing merging of corporations and law enforcement in a host of different areas. This is just one area.
Because I think ultimately the state control, Mike, that they're building, the system of state control, has to be absolute. You cannot have one glimmer of truth coming into the system, because that little spark of truth could bring the whole stack of cards down. So they want everything linked. They want to know everything about every single individual. And of course, it is being pooled in these hubs. This is what all of the MAPPA system is about, and Theresa May's new initiative, name of which has just gone out. We've got
Fusion Doctrine. Are you talking about?
Fusion Doctrine. This is all to bring a massive integrated state spying apparatus into place, and of course, you can only have a criminal government wanting to do that. So I think we're now starting to see what the sham of Labour, Lib Dem and Conservatives really is.
But cyber, not just in the police sphere, but also the military sphere. And here's Jens Stoltenberg this morning, who's talking all about the NATO Cyber Defence Pledge. And he said, well, he was very pleased that France was organising the conference that he was speaking at. This is the first annual conference on the Cyber Defence Pledge. And he said it showed France's strong commitment to collective defence and also the efforts to strengthen cyber defences and also to implement the Cyber Defence Pledge. So in 2016, he said NATO leaders designated cyberspace as a domain alongside land, sea and air. That means re-examining everything that they do from the top to the bottom. So whether they're in Afghanistan or the Baltic countries, cyber is now a core part of their operations. And he said that NATO has 3 key roles in cybersecurity: to drive progress across the alliance, to act as a hub for information sharing, training and expertise, and to protect networks. And he said, he said he's often asked under what circumstances would NATO trigger Article 5 in the case of a cyber attack. Now, Article 5, for anybody that doesn't know, is the article which says that, basically one for all for one. If one member is attacked, they're all attacked and they've all got to respond. And his answer was, we will see. The level of cyber attack that would provoke a response must remain purposefully vague, as will the nature of our response, but it could include diplomatic and economic sanctions, cyber responses, or even conventional forces, depending on the nature and consequences of the attack. We need a full spectrum response so we can respond to serious cyber attacks, even if they don't cross the Article 5 threshold. So that's good news, isn't it?
Not really, no. Well, this is good news, though.
Oh, absolutely, because we have to learn to trust AI, and here's how. So this is an article appearing on the World Economic Forum website, and it says that humans and AI can learn to get along, and this is from Australia's chief scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel, but it will take trust. And so he's proposing a Turing certificate. So what's this all about? He says, every day I put my life in the hands of hundreds of people I will probably never meet, the men and women who designed and manufactured my car, those who prepared my shop, bought lunch and installed the power sockets in my office. There are countless more. The capacity to trust in other humans we don't know is why our species dominates the planet. We are ingenious and our relentless search for new and better technology spurs us on. But ingenuity alone should not be sufficient without our knack for cooperating in large numbers and our capacity to tame dangerous forces such as electricity to safe and valuable ends. So, we've got to support AI and we've got to embrace it and we've got to trust it. And he said the most straightforward method that we could get to trust AI would be an AI trust mark. Let's call it the Turing certificate. From the great Alan Turing, a Turing stamp would be the symbol that marks a vendor and a product as bearers of the trust of the Turing certificate, meaning they're worthy of trust. The combination of the two, trustworthy organization, trustworthy product, is critical. This model has long prevailed in the manufacturing sector. Indeed, if it were not for the implementation of agreed standards for design, manufacturing, and business practices, our society would have completely rejected all electrical devices years ago on safety grounds, and we would not be worrying about AI today. A voluntary Turing certificate would allow responsible companies to opt in, including startups. So that is the solution. That's how we get to trust AI, is we put a kite mark or similar stamp on it, and then we know that everything's all right and we can trust them.
Good.
Because they're a robot.
Because they're a robot, okay, and we can trust the people that produce the algorithms to run the robot mind.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
system.
And let's bring some of that trust into the real world, because here's Sir James Munby, the outgoing president of the Family Law Division, who was giving a talk about digital family law. Because of course we've been talking about this for the last 2 or 3 years since Lord Leveson presented his findings on the future of the legal system in the UK and the introduction of more and more, ultimately leading, I suppose, to AI judges. I don't know, but maybe that's where we're going.
Well, they might be more intelligent.
Well, that's quite possible. But Munby here was giving a talk to the Family Law Bar Association a couple of days ago at Cumberland Lodge, and he was saying, today I wish to focus on one aspect, the forthcoming digital revolution and what it will mean for the family bar. And he said that whether we like it or not, we're moving to harness IT in law, and therefore we're going to use IT to redesign all the various forms that need to be filled in with regard to family law and all the various court orders that need to be made with regard to family law. I mean, one of the issues that we've been highlighting for a number of years, particularly through the work of Guy Taylor, has been the fact that documents have been being issued from courts without what appears to be the official oversight, so not stamped properly, not dated properly, not signed. And what we're moving towards is this completely electronic production of court orders and perhaps warrants and this kind of stuff. And how are you supposed to identify whether these things are real or counterfeit? There's no particular way to do that,
or even been changed during the time scale of the preparatory state for a court case, or during the court case. Documents changed overnight. They read something on one day, they read something different on the next day. It's astonishing.
Absolutely. So we've got a court system rushing ahead to implement IT. What they're describing as IT, because they don't really understand what IT is. But what we're moving towards is a system which removes the safety measures and the security that we have. And so his closing statement in a speech was that the moral is clear. We must welcome the future with enthusiasm and optimism, lest, like the Luddites, we find ourselves on the wrong side of history. Well, look, I'm not a Luddite. My background's technology. I'm enthusiastic for technology, but what you don't do is, for the sake of driving forward towards some kind of technological nirvana, you don't throw away the protections that thousands of years of history have built up within the system.
And as a judge, he should be particularly sensitive to the need to protect systems.
Well, particularly when he's dealing in the Family Law Division, which he knows is one of the most corrupt divisions within the entire British judiciary. Indeed,
and I often think, because of course his father-in-law was Harry Beckoff, and Harry Beckoff, amazing gentleman, 100 years old, and he was still warning and fighting of the coming dictatorship in UK. So this particular judge has not been isolated from all the ideas that we need to be really careful of what's happening. He actually had members of his own family campaigning and campaigning. And Harry Beckoff, of course, had been doing so really since his active time during the Second World War. Well, not to worry, because we can turn to the church to help us in our time of need. A great headline from the Mail: Church of England hands one of its charity chiefs a bonus of $250,000 despite its advice to the city to curb cash rewards. So this is the Church of England that can't repair church property. We have to have collections to keep the slates on the roof. But this article beginning to delve into what the church is really about. But of course, true for the Daily Mail, they just don't do the research deep enough. So let's help with a bit. So we're going to bring in 45-year-old Tom Joy, executive at Church Commissioners for England, the charity that manages the Church of England's investments. And he's now on 500k. So you're managing the investments, you're getting bonuses of 250,000. It's quite an interesting arrangement that the church has got. Now, somebody was kind enough to do a little bit of research for us this morning and sent it in to us. And they said, well, you should have a look at the Church of England's Ethical Investment Advisory Group. And the secretary is a gentleman called Adam Matthews. So here he is. He's co-chair the Transition Pathway Initiative, TPI. That all sounds good, common purpose language. Head of the Engagement Church Commissioners for England and C of E Pensions Board. So what can we add to that? Well, let's get a bit of detail on. So he's founder and co-chair of the Transition Pathway Initiative, an asset owner-led initiative supported by funds with over 5 trillion, not billion, but trillion, $7 trillion in assets under management. He's built and led a dedicated team that engages on behalf of the Church Commissioners and Pensions Board with, quote, global companies at board level on climate change, governance, social and environmental issues. There's nothing about helping the poor and needy amongst that. The first thing that's listed is climate change, not people who can't feed themselves or people who've got no fresh water. Head of the Church of England Secretariat facilitating ethical investment advice to 3 national investing bodies with combined assets in excess of 12 billion. So I'm a bit puzzled that the church is apparently so poor and we have to run a few soup kitchens on out-of-date tins of food.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being cynical here. Church of England representative to the Global Steering Board of the Mining and Faith Reflections Initiative. Well, that can't be true because I've been down a couple of mines. They're very dark. You don't see any reflections at all down there. A dialogue with mining company chief executives and church leaders. This is bizarre stuff, Mike.
Well, depends what the church is, doesn't it?
Depends what the church is. But good news is he's former chair of governors of 2 schools in Lambeth, London. So can we add to this? Well, I'm afraid we can. Let's have a look at this. This is the Bishop of Manchester, David Walker, who is chair of the EIAG. Church Commissioners, an independent body established by Parliament to manage historic investments on behalf of the Church of England. They have investable assets of a mere 7.9 billion, and they paid out 230 million to support the Church of England and its diocese in 2016. So we've got this poor church handing the plate out every Sunday, scraping up a few loose coins in order to keep the slates on the roof. They do manage to pay a very, very expensive and specialist legal team, which is there to protect the Church of England from claims of sexual abuse. And they fought some of these claims in the past in a particularly foul and aggressive way. Plenty of money for that, not much money for Christian principles. So if you're sitting, listening or watching today and you're a Christian involved with the Church of England, perhaps the onus falls on you, falls on us to ask the Church of England what it's really doing in those coal mines. And this one, I'm going to thank the gentleman who sent it through to us. We did mention this about a week ago, but the Scottish Herald had reported that a Clyde-built Navy vessel was found with glued bolts. So the heads of the bolts had been cut off and then glued back on. It now emerges that it wasn't just one vessel. This has happened on more than one, and the Herald picked up on it. So let's have a look at some of the comments here. This is Douglas Chapman. He's SNP spokesman for defence procurement. He said it's deeply concerning that further incidents of defects have been found on another River-class OPV vessel. The Ministry of Defence must ensure these faults are properly investigated and that there's no risk posed to the safety of crew. I'm meeting with BAE Systems this week and I'll be raising this matter with them directly. Well, Mike, cutting off the heads of bolts, and then gluing them back on is not a defect.
It's sabotage.
It's sabotage. But there's no mention of sabotage. He only talks about defects. So let's bring in the Spider-Man himself, because there wasn't a name to the mod spokesman, so I've attributed it to Gavin Williamson. He says HMS Forth remains on track to enter service later this year, when she will go on to tackle piracy, safeguard our fishing stocks and protect our coastline. It's normal for us to work with industry partners to make some rectifications to ships shortly after they've been handed to the Royal Navy, and BAE Systems are already a work of these areas. So he ignores the whole point of the thing. We've got defects when it should be sabotage, and according to him, we've got pirates at work around the coast of the UK, not sure where they're coming from, Ivory Coast actually, carrying away our women. Not to worry, we've got the OPVs to sort that out. But this is the question, what defects? This is sabotage. Why is it that the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about sabotage? And we can answer the question thanks to Mike, because what is the mainstream media involved in? It's this. Man in hospital after shark attack off the Cornish coast. Where did the shark attack occur, Mike?
On the deck of the ship.
On the deck of the ship. We had a fishing boat. They caught a shark in the nets. The shark was then brought up on deck. Pretty dangerous situation on a moving fishing boat at sea. A shark, lots of sharp teeth. This was not a shark attack off the Cornish coast.
No.
So we're going to label this as certified official mainstream media fake news. And if anybody wants to take the Telegraph up on that, I think it's worth doing. That's it for today's news. Thank you very much for joining us. And once again, a big thank you to all the people that helped us make that NHS conference possible. I'm just going to leave you with the thought we have reason to believe that open democracy went out of its way to try and undermine that conference, to warn off some of our speakers from speaking out freely on the subject of the NHS. And if you don't know who open democracy is, I suggest you look, but I think you will find it brings us back to George Soros. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.